And not for the first time, Rachel Reeves has been accused of being a tiny bit flexible with the truth. It's actually getting hard to keep up with the Chancellor's alleged deceptions. And the most recent example is so petty it is almost more damning because it makes you wonder whether anything she says can be trusted. Here's a quote from the newspaper The Daily Express. The Chancellor's Who's Who entry claimed she was previously a contributor to the Journal of Political Economy, a prestigious and highly selective journal featuring only the best quality academic articles. It's now been revealed she in fact wrote for the European Journal of Political Economy, a difference described as akin to that between Oxford University and the former Polytechnic Oxford Brookes. Bit of classism there. The entry also repeats her now disproven claim to have worked at the Bank of England until 2009, when she actually left in 2006 after just 5.5 years. Who's Who is the UK's most prominent directory of prominent figures, having been published since 1849 and includes more than 33,000 biographies. Since 1897, entries have been compiled from questionnaires filled in by their subjects, which the founders claimed leads to improved accuracy. Therefore, the inaccuracy in Miss Reeves' entry suggests she was once again responsible for an embellishment. They do seem to have caught her red-handed here. As the piece mentions, Reeves' time at the Bank of England is one point of major contention. The Sunday Times dug up an interview she gave to the Stylist magazine in 2021, that of course is the magazine of the Sunday Times, where she said the following. I spent a decade working as an economist at the Bank of England and loved it. So I was excited to be given the opportunity to help shape our country's economic future. However, according to her LinkedIn, Rachel Reeves only worked at the Bank of England for 5.5 years. 5.5, 10, quite a big difference. And it was subsequently pointed out that for one of those years, she was studying at the London School of Economics. There's also her role at HBOS, the merged Halifax and Bank of Scotland. According to Reeves' LinkedIn, she worked there as an economist. But right-wing blog Guido Fawkes accused her of exaggerating her role in, quote, a mundane support department. That was based on the testimony of former colleagues. It was confirmed that Rachel Reeves actually worked in a managerial role in the complaints handling department, and on her LinkedIn, the economist job title was replaced with retail banking. A former colleague also alleged that in 2009, Reeves was almost sacked by HBOS over an expenses scandal. A BBC investigation found there was an expenses investigation into Reeves and 2 other senior managers. Here's a quote from that piece. We have learned that there was an expenses investigation into Reeves and 2 other senior managers. A detailed 6-page whistleblowing complaint and dozens of pages of attached evidence, which we have seen, raised concerns that the 3 managers were using the bank's money to, quote, fund a lifestyle, with allegedly inappropriate spending on dinners, events, taxis and gifts, including for each other. We have not been able to establish what the final outcome of the investigation was. Indeed, it may not have concluded. But the initial part of the investigation, which was conducted by internal audit at the request of the bank's risk department, found that the 3 managers appeared to have broken the rules and the whistleblower's allegations were substantiated, according to a senior source with knowledge of the investigation. Also, if you look at the dates, I think that's around March, April. I believe Reeves leaves in May. Important to say, Rachel Reeves claims to have taken a sort of redundancy package. And of course, in 2009, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, HBOS was in deep trouble. But you can see why, if you're being unsympathetic, that kind of looks bad. Anyway, there was also the controversy over Rachel Reeves' book. The Financial Times found more than 20 examples of plagiarism in The Women Who Made Modern Economics. Entire passages were either directly copied and pasted or reworked with only minor changes, with no acknowledgement of the original source. Reeves admitted she'd made mistakes, but played down the scale of the wrongdoing. Here's what she told the BBC at the time. It is true that there were some sentences in the book that were not properly referenced in the bibliography. I'm the author of that book. I hold my hands up and say, I should have done better. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd find it easier to stomach the fact our Chancellor is basically a blagger if she'd spent less time lecturing the rest of us on our work ethic. I see headlines like this. Unemployed young people must step up, Chancellor says. And I think, well, it is probably much easier to find a job if you just make things up on your CV. Sure, I'll step up if I can double the amount of time I worked here or create whole new publications, which I never actually did. Kieran, what do you think? Am I being unfair? With Rachel Reeves, there's two things that really come to mind. The first is that some of this stuff is so obscure that to not tell the whole truth about it would indicate that it's quite widespread. And at the same time, I know lots of people lie on CVs, lots of people misrepresent their skills. Her LinkedIn was still saying this stuff when she was literally the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Bob Dylan claimed he was a trained circus performer when he first started out. But then again, Bob Dylan wrote Blowing in the Wind at the age of 21. Probity is important, but so also is brilliance. And I think the main problem for the Chancellor is that she seems to possess neither. And, quite aside from all of that, it is, we're talking about Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's the second most important role in government in this country after the Prime Minister. And she is part of a government that, as you alluded to, Aaron, is through Liz Kendall and the current DWP and so on, waging a kind of culture war against so-called scroungers. And of course, that isn't exactly what we're discussing here, but it's related. It's tangentially related to it or adjacent to it. And so I think that those factors combined, we were talking about this earlier, several of us, as to whether it was really that egregious. I think it is precisely for those reasons that we're not only talking about the Chancellor of the Exchequer, we're not only talking about a government that is extremely right-wing and wants to clamp down on, people who allegedly are scrounging, though there is zero data to support that view. We're also talking about a Chancellor who just can't seem to deliver anything and a government that just can't seem to deliver anything. All of those things dovetailed or wrapped up together make it quite a significant story that she seems to be a habitual and repetitive liar. I think, I don't want to see a government comprised of people who went to elite schools, people who have worked at the most elite and prestigious organizations in the world. And in Rachel Reeves, somehow we seem to find something even worse, which is somebody who lies about their elite credentials without having put in any of the prerequisite work. And I think what we need is, broadly speaking, there's a serious point here about the supply of politicians into British political life and into government. We talked about it last week, Aaron, as well, that there is a serious problem with the quality of politician that this country seems to be producing. Again, I'm very aware of the limitations on that argument. I'm very aware that every generation hates its politicians. You could go back all the way to the 18th, 17th century and find caricaturists lampooning the politicians of the day, saying that this is the most inept bunch that's ever been elected or not elected, if you go back far enough. However, there is a marked decline. I think everybody broadly agrees there's a marked decline over the past 10, 15 years, certainly, in the quality of candidate that is making it into Parliament. We need to think very seriously about how we draw people up from a broad cross-section of society, but do it in a way that is genuinely meritocratic and isn't just based on connections or, in this case, lying on your CV or good old-fashioned elitism.
Yeah, what makes this really interesting for me is that with the Labour right, the modus operandi is credentialism, right? That you have the credentials. They only listen to people who, are CEOs of FTSE 100 company if you're going to have an opinion on the economy or business. Forget being somebody who's a small business person with 20 staff. I don't care about you. I care about the FTSE CEO. They care about status and credentialism. And I find it really strange that as a result of that blind faith in credentialism, you then get Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves? Somebody who said they're an economist, but actually what were they doing again? I don't know. What were they doing? Business continuity or something? I don't know. Something tangentially related, operational in a bank, but they weren't actually working as an economist. They're trained as an economist. Anyway. So how does she end that? And I think you're right, Kieran, to talk about primaries. I do look at people like Rachel Reeves and I think What kind of political system do you have to have for this person to have ended up where she is? What kind of political system elevates this person to where they are? I look at Donald Trump with the primary system in the US, the presidential system, it makes total sense. You have a system like that, you're obviously going to reward celebrity, you're going to reward outsiders, and actually having a long-term party machine is less important. I get it. Then I look at Rachel Reeves, it's kind of like the converse. What kind of system creates Rachel Reeves as Chancellor? One which rewards loyalty and being obsequious above genuine talent. One which effectively promotes party insiders and apparatchiks. One which doesn't really care about people with original thinking, but rewards people who just say the thing that you're meant to say. You're going through the motions. A system which basically serves people who are already quite powerful in quite mundane ways. So you've got primaries, which, by the way, can create very, very bad results, but it does allow outsiders to change the rules of the game, as we saw with Bernie Sanders, as we see with Trump, as we saw with AOC at the micro level, right? And then I see our system, we have first past the post, without primaries. I think we've got the worst of both. I think it just leads to a completely dead political class. And what you can say in response to that is, well, Aaron, primaries reward populism and people can be against things but never for them. Totally buy that. The problem now with our system is that all of that energy is going towards reform. And because of first past the post but no primaries, they can, I think to some extent correctly, point to the entirety of the political class and claim it's illegitimate and unrepresentative, which, by the way, it is. I think that's a major problem. I do think that's a major problem. And I do wonder what it says about us as a country that even our supposedly intelligent centrist commentariat can't see what's coming. Kieran, any final thoughts on Reeves and what do we need to do? Give me one thing, Kieran, one thing that doesn't cost anything, which would improve the caliber of politicians in this country.
Well, I think it's very true that the political system doesn't exist in a vacuum. That's an insipid thing to say, but I'll explain what I mean. I think the reason we got a very high caliber of candidate in politics for a very long time, in the middle of the 20th century at least, into the later parts of the 20th century as well, actually, is because of the unions. I think that the unions acted as a brilliant trading wheel for many of the finest minds on the left and many of the best fighters on the left in Parliament. And obviously, if it follows that if the power and the prevalence of union politics dies away, then that avenue of supply, that conveyor belt from unions into the formal political system is going to fall away. So I suppose what I'm really saying is that if you want to see a shift in the quality of the political class, then you need to shift things outside of politics, because part of the problem is people are going on a different kind of conveyor belt from Oxbridge straight into Westminster, working as interns, then working as spads, then becoming politicians. And I don't want to sound like some version of the Daily Mail 10 years ago, but they don't have any real world experience. And that's not universally true, don't get me wrong, but it is true of an increasing number of parliamentarians and certainly an increasing number of Labour parliamentarians. So I think, I've just set the little task of reconfiguring the structural apparatus outside of the Labour Party and presiding over a resurgence in the union and the power of unions in this country if we want to see an improvement in the quality of candidate. But short of that, Aaron, I think your idea for primaries is a good one. And I would love to see an entirely different electoral system in this country as well. So I think we should organise on that basis as well.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago we had really talented politicians. You look at Nye Bevan. I think at one point was a literal coal miner. This is the man who helped found the NHS. Ernest Bevan, not my politics, but he was the Secretary of State for Defence when Britain got a nuclear weapon. He was a driver before entering politics. He was a driver. I think he was a hod carrier as well at one point. Barbara Castle, you could go on and on and on and on. Immensely talented people who managed to get a foot international politics, like you say, Kieran, through the Labour movement. Compare those people today. A guy was a hod carrier, and then he's overseeing the foreign policy, defence policy of one of the world's great powers. A person was a miner, and then he's starting the NHS. We've fallen a really, really long way. And I think part of that is because we think that credentialed, professional, managerial class people have all the answers, they know everything. Actually, they're responsible for most of the things which have gone wrong over the last half a century. We keep on underperforming because we think these guys have all the answers. And it's something I think, actually, sadly, the right populists get, that the left populists haven't really been, myself included, by the way, willing to accept. That was an analysis which we should have just held on to a long time ago. The answers will not come from the credentialed professional managerial class. And tying yourselves to them as part of your political coalition will only sink you. Look what just happened to the Democrats.